Okay, so have you ever gotten that feeling like you're being watched, like just something's off?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Today, we're diving deep on how to detect surveillance, like hidden cameras and listening devices.
Cool.
Our source is this audio file called How to Easily Detect Surveillance Equipment.
Okay.
And it claims that you can find this stuff using simple things you probably already have around the house.
Oh, interesting.
So, to start things off, the first method involves something you probably have in your pocket right now, a digital camera.
Really? How does that work?
So, the source actually plays audio clips of this like weird zipping, humming, and crackling.
Hmm.
And they say that that's the kind of sound you'd hear near a hidden camera or listening device.
Oh, I see. What's happening is those devices, they often emit electromagnetic waves,
Okay.
and those can interfere with the camera's microphone.
So, the microphone is accidentally picking up on those waves.
Yeah, basically, you're using the microphone to pick up on those electromagnetic signals.
So, it's like my camera is an accidental EMF detector.
Exactly. It's really a basic technique. It's more of a something's not right here indicator than a precise locator.
So, it's not going to tell you exactly
Yeah.
where the thing is.
Right.
Got it. So then to actually pinpoint those signals, our source says to use something a little more old school, an AM radio.
AM radio, okay.
Yeah, they say to set the radio to an empty frequency, so it's all static,
Mhm.
and then slowly sweep the antenna around the room.
Hmm.
And apparently the static will change as you get closer to a hidden device.
And why is that?
Well, it's because sometimes those hidden cameras and microphones, they actually transmit on frequencies within the AM band.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so your AM radio is basically becoming a signal detector.
So you're tuning into their secret broadcast.
Yeah,
All
in a
right.
way, but we do need to remember that like baby monitors and cordless phones,
Right.
those also operate on radio frequencies, so it
Mhm.
could create similar interference.
Definitely. So crackling doesn't necessarily mean there's a spy cam in the house plant.
Exactly. It's more about looking for those like sudden changes in the static as you move it around.
You're trying to pinpoint the source of the signal.
Right, like triangulate it.
Exactly.
Now, this is where I thought it got really interesting.
Yeah.
The source says we can use EMF sensor apps on our smartphones.
On our phones. Wow.
Yeah, so there's this Android app called EMF Sensor Free.
Right.
And as you move your phone around, it gives you readings in milligauss or mg.
Okay.
And supposedly higher readings mean you're closer to hidden electronics.
Makes sense. EMF sensors are designed to detect variations in electromagnetic fields.
Right.
And electronic devices definitely create those fields,
Yeah.
but it's not a foolproof method.
Because lots of things emit EMFs.
Exactly. Your microwave, Wi-Fi, router, wiring in your walls,
Yeah. Okay.
all those can create EMF readings.
So it's more about those unusual spikes.
Right, exactly. Especially in places you wouldn't expect them.
Like if it's going crazy near the bathroom mirror.
Yeah, that could be a red flag, but you'd need more information.
Okay.
The app can't tell you what's causing it.
Got it. Now, the source also mentions an iPhone app called Tesla Meter 11th, but they said it's not as good at pinpointing the direction.
That's probably because the effectiveness can depend on a few things.
Hmm.
The app itself, the phone's hardware, even other devices in the environment.
Right. Okay. So we've got cameras, AM radios, EMF sensor apps.
Right.
Now let's get to something more high-tech thermal imaging.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, the source recommends this FLIR one.
Okay.
It's a thermal camera attachment for iPhones.
I've heard of those.
So they give this example of scanning a bathroom sink and seeing a higher temperature around the faucet.
Yeah.
Like hinting at a possible hidden device.
Yeah, thermal imaging can be really powerful for detecting heat signatures.
Uh-huh.
And all electronic devices, they generate heat even in off mode.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so they can really stand out against a cooler background.
So the bathroom sink, it just shows how it can reveal things that are invisible to us.
Exactly.
Now, this is where it gets a little spooky.
Okay.
The source claims that the FLIR one can sometimes show this pinkish fog. Yeah, emanating from a wall where they think a device is hidden.
Now, while thermal imaging is valuable, you have to be careful about interpreting those visual cues too. Literally.
So the pinkish fog isn't really a sure sign of a camera.
Right? It could be heat reflection, environmental factors.
Yeah.
It's really important to think critically and not jump to conclusions.
So basically, don't freak out just because you see some pink fog.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got using a digital camera listening for interference in AM radio to detect signals, EMF sensor apps to measure the fields,
Right.
and thermal cameras to pick up on heat signatures.
Uh,
But are there other things we should keep in mind when trying to detect this stuff?
Yeah, it's not just about the technology.
Okay.
You also need to consider the tactics used to conceal these devices.
Right.
They're often hidden in plain sight, disguised as everyday objects.
Like a fake smoke detector or something.
Exactly, or a USB charger that's actually a camera.
Oh, wow.
So even if you don't detect any obvious signals, it's worth paying attention to anything that seems out of place.
Like if something seems a little too ordinary.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got our tools and our detective eyes ready.
Right.
But before we go full spy hunter,
Yeah.
what about the legal side of this?
Oh, that's a great point. The laws around surveillance and counter-surveillance can be complex and vary a lot from place to place.
So something that's legal in one place could get me in trouble somewhere else.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Some things like using devices that block GPS signals could be illegal even if you think you're being tracked without consent.
So it's not as simple as just buying a bug detector online?
No, unfortunately not.
Right.
It's really important to understand the laws in your area and maybe talk to a lawyer if you're concerned.
Good advice.
Yeah.
So before we go full James Bond on our surroundings,
Right.
we need to do our legal homework and be mindful of everyone's privacy.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, in this first part of our deep dive, we've explored 4 methods for detecting those hidden devices: cameras, radios, apps, and thermal imaging. But as we learned, it's not just point and click. We need to be aware of the limitations of these methods,
Definitely.
the potential for false positives,
Right.
and of course the legal ramifications.
No,
But there's more to this than just the tech and the legalities, right?
absolutely.
We also need to think about the psychological impact of surveillance, that feeling of being watched even when you're not sure if you are.
Yeah, that can be really unsettling.
Definitely. And we'll explore that dimension in the next part of our deep dive.
Looking forward to it.
Stay tuned.
Okay. So we were talking about that feeling of being watched.
Yeah, like even if we haven't actually found any hidden cameras or anything,
Right.
just the thought that someone might be spying on us can be really unsettling.
It really it goes straight to our sense of privacy, you know?
Yeah.
Like humans, we need to feel in control of our personal space and our information.
Right.
And when that feels threatened,
Yeah.
it can be really unnerving.
It's like that feeling when you think someone's staring at you across the room. You get super self-conscious.
Exactly. And surveillance just magnifies that feeling.
Right.
We start second-guessing ourselves, censoring what we say and do, even withdrawing from social interactions.
So it's not just the potential harm of being spied on, but the impact of feeling watched.
Exactly. It creates this chilling effect on our behavior. We might not express ourselves as freely
Right.
or do things that could attract attention.
Which is kind of ironic because that self-censorship is already a form of control, even if no one's actually watching.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
It shows how insidious this fear can be.
Right.
We limit ourselves and conform even when there's no real threat.
Like we're preemptively surveilling ourselves.
In a sense, yes, we internalize this gaze of the imagined watcher.
Wow. Okay. So how do we deal with this? How do we balance awareness of the risks without letting the fear take over?
Well, I think knowledge is power, understanding how this stuff works,
Yeah.
both the technology and the psychology that
Yeah.
can help us protect ourselves.
So deep dives like this are a good start.
Absolutely. It's also important to set boundaries online and offline. Be mindful of what you share, the devices you use, and the places you put yourself in.
And if we think we're being surveilled, remember to get legal advice before doing anything rash.
Exactly. Always err on the side of caution.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the tech, the legal stuff, and the psychological impact.
Right.
But our source also gets into the nuts and bolts of how these hidden devices work. And it's fascinating. It's kind of creepy, too, like how sophisticated these things have become.
Oh, yeah. For sure gone are the days of those bulky cameras and microphones.
Right.
Today's surveillance equipment is tiny, almost invisible.
They mentioned that a lot of these devices are designed to look like ordinary things. Pens, USB chargers, even smoke detectors.
Exactly. And they have advanced features: motion detection, night vision, remote access.
So someone could be watching from anywhere in the world.
It's definitely possible, and that's what makes this so complex.
Right.
There are legitimate reasons for surveillance security law enforcement, but the potential for abuse is there too.
It's about finding that balance between security and privacy.
Exactly, and that's a conversation we as a society need to have.
Right.
As technology gets better and these devices are everywhere, we need to decide where we draw the line.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk more about the methods for detecting these devices.
Okay.
Earlier, we talked about using a digital camera to listen for that electromagnetic interference. And our source actually gives examples of the sounds to listen for.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
They say you might hear a high-pitched whine near a hidden camera, almost like a mosquito.
Oh, wow.
And a clicking or ticking sound could mean there's a listening device recording.
So not just random static, but specific sounds.
Exactly. But again, we have to remember these sounds could come from other things too.
Right. More investigations needed.
Right. Our source also has some tips for using an AM radio more effectively, like using a high-quality radio with a directional antenna.
Makes sense. A directional antenna can really help you pinpoint that signal.
Uh-huh.
And they say to slowly sweep it across the area, listening for changes in the static.
They even say to tune in to specific frequencies like 120 megahertz and 900 megahertz. Apparently, those are commonly used by surveillance devices.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's getting technical, but they explain that those frequencies are used for wireless video and audio transmission.
Oh, I see.
So by scanning those frequencies, you're trying to intercept the signals.
They're like radio detectives.
I know, right? But again, lots of things use these frequencies, so we got to be careful.
Definitely. Okay, what about the EMF sensor apps?
Right. The source goes deeper into the types of apps and how they work.
Okay.
Some use the phone's magnetometer to detect magnetic fields, while others use a combination of sensors. And they do mention the limitations. The readings can be affected by things like power lines, appliances, even the metal in your phone case.
Oh, wow.
They also give tips for interpreting the readings, like a sudden spike when you move your phone closer to something.
Right.
That could indicate a hidden device.
But don't jump to conclusions based just on a high reading.
Right. Got to consider other factors.
And they stress using a calibrated EMF meter.
Oh, yeah.
Not all apps are created equal.
Some are more accurate. Some phones have better sensors.
Right. So do your research and find a good app.
Okay. And even then, it's just one piece of the puzzle, right?
Exactly.
Got to look for patterns and anomalies.
Now, what about thermal imaging?
Okay, so the source explains how those cameras actually work.
Okay.
They detect infrared radiation, which is emitted by everything, people and devices. And the camera makes a visual image showing temperature variations as different colors.
So electronic devices, they usually give off more heat.
Right.
And that's why they stand out on a thermal image, even if they're well hidden.
That's cool.
But there are limitations. A device might be behind something that blocks the radiation.
Oh, okay.
And some materials, like metal, can reflect heat, creating false positives.
So again, use good judgment.
Right.
They also mention that these cameras can be used for more than just finding hidden devices.
Oh, yeah, like what?
Like finding heat leaks in your house, identifying electrical problems, even tracking wildlife.
Wow, it's pretty versatile.
Okay, so we revisited the 4 methods, talked about how they work and what to look for.
Right.
But sometimes it's best to call in a pro, right?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're really concerned about being surveilled, talk to a security expert or a private investigator.
And remember the legal stuff we talked about? Make sure you're not breaking any laws.
Right. Got to be careful.
So in this second part, we explored the psychological impact of surveillance. We dug deeper into the methods and talked about getting professional help if needed.
Right. A lot of good information.
But there's one final piece of the puzzle we need to talk about. What can we do to prevent this from happening in the first place?
That's the big question, and we'll answer in the final part of our deep dive.
Awesome. Stay tuned. All right. So we talked about how to detect hidden surveillance devices.
Right.
And we talked about that feeling of being watched.
Yeah.
But now I want to talk about how to prevent this stuff from happening in the first place.
That's a good question. How do we protect our privacy when it feels like everyone's always watching?
Right. Exactly.
It's a valid concern these days. But the good news is there are things you can do to minimize your risk.
Okay. So you're saying we don't have to become hermits and live off the grid.
No, not at all. It's about being aware of the risks and taking some practical steps to protect yourself.
So what kind of steps are we talking about?
Well, think of it as a layered approach, combining different strategies.
Layered approach. I like that. Where do we start?
Let's start with your physical space. One of the best ways to prevent surveillance is to just make it harder to plant a device.
So like doing a regular sweep of your house looking for anything suspicious?
Exactly. Pay attention to anything that seems out of place.
Yeah.
A new object.
Yeah.
You don't recognize a device that looks tampered with. Even a weird noise you can't explain.
Our source mentions that common hiding spots are things like smoke detectors, clocks, lamps, even USB chargers.
Right, those are everyday objects people often overlook. It's also good to check for anything positioned to give a clear view, like a camera pointed at a bed or a desk.
So basically, don't assume that a smoke detector is just a smoke detector.
Except be curious. Take a closer look if something seems off. Investigate it.
Got it. So regular sweeps are important. What else can we do?
Think about physical security measures like window coverings, your own security cameras, even motion detectors.
So you're saying fight fire with fire, use cameras to deter cameras.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Having your own security system can deter snoopers,
Okay.
and it gives you a record of what's happening, which can be helpful if something does happen.
Makes sense. But what about when we're out in public hotel rooms, Airbnbs, places where we don't have as much control?
That's when you got to be extra vigilant. When you're in a new environment, take a minute to look around.
Our source actually mentioned using your phone's flashlight to find hidden cameras.
Oh, yeah. The lens of a camera will reflect light so you can shine your flashlight around.
Okay.
Look in those dark corners, vents, places like that.
We're like detectives looking for clues.
Right, and they also say to be mindful of mirrors, especially two-way mirrors.
Oh, yeah, those are creepy.
And any devices with cameras or microphones, like TVs and digital assistants.
So the TV in my hotel room might be watching me.
It's possible, if you're concerned, cover the lens with tape or unplug it when you're not using it.
Good advice. Okay, so we've got the physical space covered. What about online? How do we protect our privacy there?
That's a whole other layer of protection.
Hmm.
And one of the most important things is being aware of what you share online.
Okay.
Think about what you post on social media, the websites you visit, the apps you use.
All that data can be used to track us, right?
Exactly. The more you share, the easier it is for someone to figure out your habits, your interests, even your location.
So be careful what you post. What else can we do?
Strong passwords are crucial. Use a different one for each account and make them complex.
Yeah, and don't reuse the same password for everything.
Absolutely. If
Yeah.
one account gets hacked, you don't want them all to be vulnerable.
Right. Okay, strong passwords, check. What else?
Two-factor authentication that adds an extra layer of security.
How does that work?
You'll need to enter a code from your phone or email in addition to your password.
So even if someone gets my password, they still can't get in.
Right. It makes it much harder.
Okay, two-factor authentication. Got it. What about all the apps we use? Those seem to be collecting data on everything.
They do. A lot of them collect a lot of data.
So what can we do about that?
Be aware of the permissions you're giving them. Do they really need access to your location, your contacts, your microphone? If not, deny those permissions, and if an app seems too intrusive, just don't use it.
Good point. What about public Wi-Fi? Is that still a security risk?
Public Wi-Fi can be risky because it's often unsecured. Anyone can intercept your data.
Okay.
If you have to use a VPN, a virtual private network.
Right. A VPN encrypts our internet traffic so people can't see what we're doing.
Exactly.
VPN for public Wi-Fi. Got it. Anything else?
Watch out for phishing scams. Those are emails or messages that try to trick you into giving away personal information.
Oh, yeah, like your passwords and credit card numbers.
Never click on links or open attachments from people you don't know, and be wary of anything that seems too good to be true.
So basically, don't be naive and don't trust everything you see online.
Exactly. It's always better to be cautious.
Okay, so in this deep dive, we covered a lot. How to detect hidden devices, the psychological impact of being watched, and how to protect ourselves, both physically and digitally.
It's a lot to think about.
It is, and as technology keeps advancing, this is going to be an ongoing conversation.
Absolutely. Things are always changing. We need to stay informed.
So what's the one thing you want listeners to take away from this?
I want them to know that they don't have to be victims in this age of surveillance.
Okay.
By understanding the risks, taking steps to protect ourselves, and having these conversations about privacy, we can all be more aware and confident.
Great advice. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of surveillance.
It was my pleasure.
Until next time, stay vigilant and stay safe.